Harold, please, not again, the TV.
Ma, come on, Ma. Why do you have to make such a big deal out of this, Ma? You know you'll get the set back in a couple of hours. Why you gotta make me feel so guilty, Ma?
Requiem for a Dream is a film that came out in the year 2000 that's written and directed by Darren Aronofsky. So, Requiem for a Dream is actually this month's subscriber poll winner. The Fountain didn't win, but it was a fan favorite, so I went ahead and watched and reviewed that last weekend. So if you haven't checked that review out, please do. But I was incredibly ecstatic that Requiem for a Dream won the subscriber poll because this is a film that's actually a really special and personal film to me. Because this film, similarly to a lot of people out there, was one of the earliest gateway films to art house cinema. And I think the reason why this is a lot of people's gateway film to art cinema is because of the fact that when people think of art house movies, especially if you're an outsider, you think of films that have an unforgivingly slow pace. You think of films that are just riddled and filled with ambiguities. Films that are incredibly interpretive. But Requiem for a Dream is the complete opposite of all that because this film is incredibly straightforward. It's a high-octane, high-energy, visceral experience that has such a wow factor to it that makes it so easy to draw anybody in and get them immediately engaged and sucked into what this film's offering. A modern-day example of what I consider to be art house filmmakers that have such a high energy to them would be the Safdie brothers because between Good Time and Uncut Gems, those films have an unforgivably fast pace to them, but makes it to where I feel like really anybody could watch them and just get engaged throughout its runtime. And even one of the earlier films called Heaven Knows What, even that film has this electrifying and energetic style to it, which also is actually kind of reminiscent to a film like Requiem for a Dream that really goes in on tackling drug abuse. But with that being said, it's been at least 5+ years since I've rewatched this film. I mean, when I first got into this film, I rewatched it all the time. Like, I rewatched it at least 3 or 4 times a year. But there's been a good 5 to 6 year gap where I just haven't gone back to rewatch it. But I rewatched it in preparation for this review, and it still holds up incredibly well. It's such an immersive and unforgivingly visceral experience. I thought that me, at this point in my life, having seen so much fucked up movies and just so much disturbing material in film that, I wouldn't really be that affected by this film as I was before. But I was wrong. This film definitely still leaves a long-lasting impact on your psyche because of the way that Darren Aronofsky presents everything. Again, as I said in my review for The Fountain, Darren Aronofsky's ability to deliver such a unique aesthetic presentation is what makes this film so incredibly memorable. Like, yeah, obviously, the shock value content that's in this film also is a reason why it stays in people's minds. But it's the way that it's all delivered and the way that it's all packaged and the way that it's all edited and presented together is the biggest reason as to why this film is so memorable and allows it to stand out amongst all the other films that also tackle drug abuse. And one of the criticisms that I've heard about this film, even back when I first saw it, was that it's one-dimensional with its theme. Like, this film is basically just one giant anti-drug PSA. And although I don't really think that's an unfair thing to say, I feel like just labeling that way kind of diminishes the film's accomplishments in terms of not only its craft, but also the way that it does explore the consequences of drug abuse. Like, yeah, this film overall is sending the message that drugs are bad, but it goes into a lot of different avenues and conveys a lot of different situations within these characters and the story that, for the lack of a better word, beautifully explores the tragedies and the nightmarish consequences that can become of drug abuse and how it tears families apart, how it tears relationships apart, how it destroys one's dignity, how it destroys one's career and life goals. I mean, it really explores a lot of these consequences, and I think it does it incredibly well. And again, all of this is expressed not only through the screenplay, but most importantly through the power of Darren Aronofsky's unique vision. Because when it comes to the direction and the aesthetic presentation, this film's absolutely perfect. I mean, every single phase of filmmaking in that department is flawless. Whether it be the score from Clint Mansell, which again, I talked about him a lot in my review for The Fountain, but he's done all of the scores for Darren Aronofsky, at least from my knowledge he has. Every score that he's composed that I've heard from him, I absolutely adore. I adored it most recently in The Fountain, and the score here for Requiem for a Dream is so iconic. Like, even if you've never heard of this movie or seen it before, you know the theme for Requiem for a Dream. It's just so memorable and so powerful, and when we start getting into the third act of this film, the score just evolves/devolves into something that is so wacky and so chaotic sounding that really elevates the disturbing element of what's going on in the third act. But when it comes to the aesthetic department, I think it's fair to say that the editing in this film is the most impressive and just mind-blowing element of this film. Because there's so many sequences in this film that are brought to life through the stylistic editing, and you can tell how delicate it is. Because there's so many sequences where through its editing and through the delicacy that's presented, there's like a rhythm to it. And the abrupt, fast-paced nature of the editing, I feel like is a huge reason why this film is energetic and really does make it feel like a drug-fueled nightmare. And even though I like all the characters in this film, personally, my favorite character that this film offers is Sarah Goldfarb, played by Ellen Burstyn. Her character is so tragic, but so well embodied by her performance. And I can confidently say that she by far gives the most impressive performance in this film. Honestly, it's one of the most impressive performances I've ever seen ever. And even though this film basically didn't get nominated for anything because I think it's just, just the nature of this movie, it's a little too edge for the Academy. But the one thing that it did get nominated for was Best Actress from Ellen Burstyn, and I think that it's wonderful that the Academy at least recognized her for all the talent that she showcased in this film. Unfortunately, she didn't win, but still, I think the nomination alone is very well deserved. Because the kind of lonely and desperate character that eventually goes through this unfortunate manic episode because of her own drug abuse is just, you would think that it would just take such an emotional toll on any actor trying to portray this. And she really does embody and deliver all these lines with so much emotion and so much stress that you really do buy every single second that she's on screen. There's this monologue scene that she has to deliver in this film, and I remember back then it would yank tears out of me. Rewatched it recently, obviously, and still just doesn't fail to yank tears out of me. It's that emotionally powerful. And I read up on IMDb trivia that the cinematographer himself was getting teary-eyed while filming it. And it's just because she delivers so convincingly a moment where the character is in one hand coming to terms with her old age and her loneliness, but at the same time is so desperate to do something that she feels as redeeming and important with the remaining years of her life. And I mean, coming to terms with one's old age is already an extremely frightening truth that everybody pretty much has to deal with. And on top of that, to feel like you really don't have any avenue to share the things in your life that you feel like you've accomplished is just another tragic layer to her character and to that monologue in general. And again, I think that she delivers that in such an emotionally convincing way. And even on top of that, like revolving around her character, you get this nightmarish trip sequence that is just, again, just beautifully displays Darren Aronofsky's ability to entrap the audience in this inescapable nightmare while at the same time making the audience feel for this character. And just the dynamic that's presented in this film between her and her own refrigerator is terrifying. It's simple yet terrifying. And honestly, the only weak link in this film in terms of acting is actually Jared Leto's character. Not that he gives a bad performance in this film, but a few parts where he has to get emotional and sentimental, I just thought his acting was noticeable. Like, I'm not nearly as convinced by his emotions as from someone like Jennifer Connelly and Ellen Burstyn in this film. Shit, even Marlon Wayans, I feel like, gives a pretty damn good performance in this film. But one thing I also liked about this film is how each phase of this film's narrative and where the characters currently are in the story are represented through the seasons of the year. The film begins in the summer, and this is where pretty much all the main characters are thriving. I mean, when it comes to Ellen Burstyn's character, she's not really, in her own mind, she's thriving. So mentally, she feels very positive. But when it comes to Jared Leto, Jennifer Connelly, and Marlon Wayans, they get to the point where they are thriving in their life. They're not thriving in a recommendable way or in a conventional way, but this is where their spirits are up. And it kind of goes without saying, once fall and winter hits, they just start going down this downward spiral. And honestly, I think that this film has arguably the most intense downward spiral that I've seen ever presented in a film. I mean, it is unforgiving as hell. I mean, unforgiving is putting it lightly. And I could see a lot of people saying that it's a bit overkill with it. And again, like, I wouldn't really disagree with that, but I think the shock value and its overkill that's presented in the third act is one of the many reasons why it does stand out amongst other drug abuse films, and is also, for the lack of a better word, a part of its charm. And again, it's that aesthetic presentation that just gives it this giant shot of adrenaline. I mean, again, the way that it edits between all these characters and how it cross-cuts between all of their downward spirals and all of their fallouts, and through its chaotic score and all of its choices in cinematography, it makes it so eye-popping. Like, it's one of those sequences to where you can't help but look at the screen because how engaged you are, but at the same time, there's so many segments where you just want to look away, but you just can't bring yourself to. And again, I can totally understand why this third act would be a little too much for some people, because it's disgusting, it's depressing, it's hopeless, and I can see somebody just being like, you know, how much more of this do you expect me to take? But for me, I can't help but be so engaged with what Aronofsky is presenting me. I'm so enthralled by the journey that he's putting me through, even if it is depressing, even if it is intense and shocking content-wise. The intensity and the power of its craft is just so undeniable, and I can't help but commend it for that. So I'm going to give Requiem for a Dream a solid 9 out of 10. Yeah, this film just has so much staying power, and even after rewatching it after all these years, still leaves an impression on me, still leaves an emotional impact on me. And if you haven't seen this film by chance, I recommend you watch it as soon as possible, because I really do think that you're missing out. Even if it's not 100% your cup of tea, I don't think that you're going to forget it. But anyways, that's all I got to say about Requiem for a Dream. If you really enjoyed what I had to say about the film, please give it a thumbs up and share it amongst your friends. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to be updated on more film-related content.